can, item 15, and then we'll take our break. Is everyone all right with that? Okay. All right, so we'll close item 14 and welcome back Elko and Vegas and open item 15, Wildlife Commission Policies, Agency Initial Review and Suggested Actions. Management Analyst 3, Kim Jolly, and Division Administrators for possible action. The department shall provide the Commission with a report of an initial Commission policy review. The initial Commission policy review included an evaluation of relevancy, need, redundancy of the Commission's current policies. The department's broad recommendations for potential Commission policy edits and updates will be provided to the Commission. The Commission may choose to provide direction as to the process for updating existing policies or developing new policies that may be warranted. Any Commission policy change or policy adoption would require at least 2 public meetings prior to adoption. Before I turn this over to Ms. Jolly, the Division Administrators, I'd just like to explain that this is actually a request that generated with me. I actually discovered some missing, what I think is a missing policy when we started the Humboldt County Elk Plan. I don't know what happened to it over past commissions, but it went away and has since been replaced. And so in looking at the list, it was clear in my mind that what we needed to do was have a comprehensive review of the policies. So before we got to the end of the year, I wanted the department to at least give us some initial feedback. My intention and why part of the reason why this agenda item is on today is to discuss with the Commission what the best way to proceed on this is, because as you'll see, there's a fair amount of policies that probably need some revision. There's a fair amount that need to be kept. In my mind, the most logical place to work through some of this, at least the initial steps, would be our policy committee, which obviously we need to adjust some of the assignments, and I'm hopeful to do that later today. And so with that, I don't know if there's any questions of me where I'm trying to go with this, but that was the genesis for this agenda item and why I requested the department to at least get us started so you all know what we might have ahead for us in the coming year. Director Wasley.
Thank you, Chairman Drew. And just to add to that, I would just like to speak a little bit to the process that generated this table that you all have before you now. And I believe there's a supply in the room and there's some on the website as well. And as Chairman Drew indicated, it was direction that he provided to the department to provide at least a preliminary overview of the existing policies. What we decided was a logical division of those policies, if you will, were 3 buckets. One was the keep bucket, one was a needs revision, and one was a no longer needed. So Kim Jolly got the division administrators through the policies as each of the divisions were affected by those. And I think what's contained in this self-explanatory policy number, policy title, the year that was last reviewed, the department so just mentioned, and then for that recommendation. This is a first glance. I think that have ample opportunity to the Commission decides they want to dive into greater depth. But today, in this year, there are in particular or specific questions on these policies or justification for that recommendation. Can speak to how that was derived.
Questions? Over. All right, go.
And like Director Wesley stated, it's just a simple table. There's 6 commission policies, and we actually got this request in the summer after the session, so we started looking at these because the policy numbers over the years, the commission repeated policy numbers and had some issues when they would repeal the policy and use the same number. So the number is not, we're not very good when it comes to whatever. That's why it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 10, 11. which is the process the commission goes over, including the rules of practice, the appeals the commission does, and production of regulations, and some of the administrative things, and then game and non-fisheries, law enforcement, have policy as well.
This question, administrators identify any potential new policies in this year. Simply looking at the existing one. I think that should pass this policies. I just want to make sure that they mix it in terms of potential to identify additional policies we may be doing.
Currently, under game non-game, potential and memorialize that registration process with the applicants of the Elkins categories. So the commission already outlined the process a couple of meetings ago, and the commission administrator identified it that might be place to put this in a commission policy.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so for the remote side, I can see Vegas. Are you guys having trouble hearing anyone?
Chairman, we can't hear you. We're getting bits and pieces. There's interference on your end.
Okay.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, we can hear you clearly. We'll go ahead and call the meeting back to order. We're in the middle of item number 15, policy review. I think, Kim, we're just getting ready to turn that over to you, so go ahead.
You know, one of those that can and said, you know, you guys keep talking.
Kim Jolly, Management Analyst 3 for the record. And for the benefit of the folks in the other locations, I'll just kind of briefly go over what you guys missed. The table that you see that was online and that was emailed is just a color-coded table to identify very high level which policies will need revision, which policies are duplicative or unnecessary and the department might suggest repeal, and which policies are fairly current and could be kept, even some with minor revisions. And the commission policies are basically just the commission's broad guidelines for the department and management of wildlife, and some of them are administrative. They're divided up amongst functions. Administrative in general is policies 1 through 11. Game and non-game are policies 20 through 27. And you'll see, as I mentioned, we only had one suggestion for a new commission policy. Game Division Administrator Brian Wakeling with the elk arbitration. That commission policy would be a good mechanism to memorialize that process that the commission already approved. And fisheries policies are 31 through 33. Law enforcement, number 40. Conservation education, 50 and 51. And then habitat policies 60 through 67. And the green with the check marks are just the policies that we suggest keeping, mainly because they're still relevant and necessary, and they have been reviewed fairly recently. As Commissioner Chairman Drew mentioned, the Administrative Policies, Regulations, and Procedures Committee reviewed and actually developed the Appeals and Petition Commission policies recently. Some of the others in yellow are just those that need revision because there might be a higher federal or state law that's changed that we need to take a look at. So those are in yellow. And then the ones that are just green with the check mark are just keep, and some even with minor revisions. So the conservation education ones, as you can see, those were reviewed very recently, 2014 and 2011, so we don't have many changes there. And then the habitat ones, although they're from last reviewed in 2002, The topics surprisingly are still very relevant and necessary, just be some edits for the committee. And there are various committees. Obviously, we would probably suggest that the Heritage Committee look at the two heritage, or the one heritage tags and vendors commission policy, because that's their purview. And then, as far as the game policies, 23 and 25 might kind of overlap, and perhaps that committee could take a look at those. So that is what I have. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, questions for Ms. Jolly? At this point? All right, oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner McNash.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kim, did you mention anything about the frequency or the need or the requirement that we review these? Did you mention anything there?
Thank you for reminding me. I mentioned it briefly, but I think for the benefit of the folks over there, I'll repeat it. There is a requirement every 3 years that executive agencies and boards and commissions review their rules of practice, which we have in both NAC and in commission policy. The rules of practice are just the rules for the public and interested parties to come before the commission, recommend changes through petition or appeals. And so we have in NAC 501 a regulation on the appeals process and the petition process. Additionally, however, in 2009, we outlined what's not in the regulation in these two commission policies 3 and 4. There might be some recommendations to perhaps, instead of automatically putting a petition on an agenda, you might want to look at changing something with the appeals process. I know there was some significantly lengthy appeals that we've had in the past year. It's really up to the commission and whatever committee. The APRC committee, or that Administrative Procedures, Regulations, and Policy Committee, was actually created to help be the committee that does the initial review of those rules of practice. That's their purpose. And then to bring it before the commission. And so that is required every 3 years. Every 10 years, agencies are required to review their regulations. Ours, we've done that recently, but it's basically a report of what's relevant and what's needed. And our agency and commission regularly reviews regulations. So we're pretty good on that, but the rules of practice we will need to review.
Okay, additional questions for Kim? All right, seeing none, Mr. Wakeling, I think you're here somewhere. Oh, you're already standing up. So a couple of items under the game and the non-game. I do believe 23 and 25 are probably going to be a high priority, and that's one that I think the Wildlife Damage Committee would be better suited to handle. Commissioner Bliss, rather than running that through the policy committee, because you guys deal with that on a regular basis. And that's probably something we'll need the department's help with, making sure those policies, if we think combining them is best, but also just getting them up to speed with the law changes that took place in the last session, probably sooner than later. We have the arbitration process for elk. The other one, just as a placeholder, and I think using this sheet as kind of a tracking sheet as we go through our updates makes a lot of sense. But the one that I'd like to make sure we add in as a placeholder is our elk policy, which I believe at one time was policy number 26 and was either replaced or overlapped with the transparency policy. And then based on our discussion yesterday, I'd like to put a placeholder in for a policy regarding wildlife contests. I think that will run through the policies and procedures committee, determine how we want to best handle that. But just as placeholders to add to the list as we start moving forward here. And Commissioner Wallace, I don't know if you had a thought on Heritage Committee taking a look at heritage policy.
We could, I think we may have a meeting coming up potentially in January. I don't remember the time of it. Because there is something that comes up for that February meeting, if I remember correctly.
Okay. Are there any concerns from the commission in regards to kind of what I'm proposing moving forward with this review? I think most of the policies would go through the policy committee with a few exceptions like predator management and the heritage committee. My thought is maybe to even add a priority and assignment column to this table. And my hope would be maybe we have a policy committee before we're associated with the January meeting so that we can start assigning priorities and moving forward on the ones that need to be reviewed. So are there any commission questions with where I'm trying to go with this and how we're trying to get there? I don't think I'm going to need a formal motion on any of this. If there's not a concern, we'll continue to carry on. But this is an action item, and so I'll open it up. Is there any county advisory board input in Reno? Now that you know kind of where we're trying to go over the next year? Public input in Reno? Rex, come on up.
Rex Flowers speaking on behalf of myself as Washoe County resident. All this information came out after the Washoe meeting, so we as residents couldn't have any input. I'm glad to see you're going to send most of this over to the administrative procedures, regulations, and policies. I would hope you wouldn't repeal any of these, but if you do repeal anything or suspend any policies, that you just suspend the policy, keep the number out of the system. As you stated earlier, Chairman Drew, policy 26 has been lost from back during the Scott Ring chair position. That had to do with your elk, pioneering elk policy. And now I see it's on the table again for possible repeal on transparency. So I would like to see those numbers stay there so that they cannot end up being duplicated again. And policy 26 is actually a part of your Nevada State elk planning management plan. So that's a terrible loss to suffer. Thank you.
Additional public comment in Reno? Okay, public comment in Las Vegas?
Yes, Chairman.
Chairman Drew, Commissioners, this is Gianna Wright for the record. And Chairman Drew, I want to thank you for bringing up a placeholder for wildlife killing contests. That was what I was going to speak to and suggest that. So just kudos for bringing it up, and great minds must think alike.
Careful who you're accusing of great minds.
Do you want to speak?
Comment Las Vegas?
No, thank you, Chairman. That's it.
You? How about Elko? Public
No
comment.
comment.
Okay. All right, with that, we'll bring it back to the commission. Director Wasley, anything to add?
No, Mr. Chairman, that's it.
Staff, administrators, anyone? Okay. Any other questions or actions at this point by the commission? All right. Seeing none, we'll close item 15.